Before you settle into your bed tonight, I want you to do something simple but powerful. Turn off your lights and let the room fall into complete darkness. Take a moment to feel the quiet around you. Now, as you lie back, open your eyes and look into the black screen in front of you. Let it become a doorway into the unknown. In the stillness, you'll find a world waiting for you, a world where light is a distant memory and darkness holds the answers. Take a deep breath and let go of everything around you. You're about to step into a place where the only thing that matters is what you can't see. Look into the black screen. Let it consume you. Let it follow you into sleep. And remember, it's not just a screen. It's a doorway. Let's begin.
The void closed in around Charlie, the distant forms of the watchers casting long shadows that stretched like dark fingers toward her. Each breath felt heavier, thicker, as if the very air was pressing against her chest. The chilling voices of the watchers echoed in her mind. Face your past, keeper. Face what you've tried to hide from. Charlie's heart raced. She tried to steady herself, but the world around her twisted, the ground beneath her feet uncertain and unstable. She could still hear the faint sound of the rain falling, cold and relentless. The images continued to flash before her, fragments of her life that had remained buried in the recesses of her mind, each one more painful than the last. The first image that materialized before her was a memory she had long tried to forget, her parents' faces in the hospital. Charlie had been just a child, too young to fully understand the weight of what was happening, but the memory was seared into her mind forever. She was sitting on the cold hospital bench, her legs dangling above the floor. Her parents, both pale and exhausted, had sat together, their hands clutched tightly in each other's, but neither could speak. A deep, gnawing sense of loss hung in the air, and young Charlie could feel it pressing against her chest even then. A doctor came out and shook his head, the look in his eyes telling her everything she feared. "I'm sorry, we couldn't save her," he said softly. Her mother, broken and lost, collapsed into her father's arms, but Charlie didn't cry. Not because she wasn't sad, but because she was too scared to show it. Too terrified that if she did, she would lose control, and her world, her fragile, broken world, would shatter beyond repair. The image flickered, replaced by the next scene, her first day at the Lalaurie mansion. Charlie stood at the edge of the front yard, staring at the imposing mansion. Its dark windows seemed to be watching her, just like the watchers she now faced. The wind blew cold and sharp, tugging at her clothes as she stood there, unsure of how to move forward. She had taken the job on a whim, needing the money and a distraction from her growing anxiety. The mansion had seemed like the perfect place, historically rich, a bit run down, and filled with strange allure. She had thought she would simply catalog the mansion's oddities and return to her life. But the house had other plans. As she had stepped inside, she felt that pull, the deep, gnawing sense of something that made her skin crawl. That sensation had only grown stronger with time, until she had no choice but to confront it. To confront her. The first whisper had come weeks after she began her work at the mansion, a faint voice in her ear in the dead of night. "You're already bound," it said. "You cannot escape." The images swirled faster, morphing into memories from her early career. She remembered the articles she had written, the sensational headlines. The world had eaten up the stories of the mansion, the dark, twisted history of Madame Lalaurie. Charlie had reveled in the attention, in the excitement of unraveling the mystery, but deep down, she knew there was something about it that wasn't quite right. She had spent so long chasing the stories of other people, never confronting her own. She had taken the job not just for the thrill of history, but to escape the guilt of her own failures. She had buried her grief over her parents' death and buried the real reason she had become a journalist in the first place, the need to prove herself. To fill the emptiness they left behind. But in her pursuit of truth, she had neglected the truth within herself. The whispers grew louder. "What have you become, keeper?" The watchers' voices intertwined, becoming one deep, ominous hum. The floor beneath Charlie trembled, and the air crackled with energy, as if the mansion itself was alive, its pulse syncing with hers. The walls of the void shifted, flickering like a broken screen, until Charlie stood before the mansion once again, but this time, there were no comforting shadows. The light that filtered through the broken windows illuminated everything, revealing every hidden truth. She stood face to face with Madame Delphine Lalaurie, the woman whose cruelty had stained the mansion for centuries. Lalaurie's eyes glowed with malice as she sneered at Charlie. "You were always meant to follow," Lalaurie hissed, her voice a low rasp that seemed to echo from every corner of the room. "You think you've escaped the curse, but the mansion has never let go of you. You've already become like me." Charlie recoiled, her heart pounding. "No," she whispered. "I'm not like you." Lalaurie's laugh filled the room, sharp and cold. "We all are, keeper. Your past, your fears, they have already shaped you. This power you think you control, it will consume you just as it consumed me. Just as it consumed them all. The vision shifted again, this time showing the mansion as it was in Lalaurie's time. Charlie saw the horrors, the bodies chained to walls, the twisted experiments, the screams that echoed through the dark halls. She saw herself in the place of those trapped souls, their terror reflected in her own eyes. The room darkened, and the watchers' voices returned, their cold whispers flooding her ears. "Face the keeper, you will become or be consumed by the darkness within." Charlie stood in the center of the mansion's dark heart, the journal clenched in her hand. The power surged within her, but it was no longer just a force she could command. It was a curse, a legacy, a test. The mansion's power flowed through her veins, wrapping around her like chains, forcing her to confront every hidden part of herself she'd ignored for years. Her guilt. Her fear. Her weakness. She could feel it all. The haunting reality of her own past, the choices that led her to this point. The watchers hovered over her, their voices growing louder. "The power is yours, keeper. But what will you do with it?" Charlie's mind raced. She had the power to end this. To rid herself of the curse. But in doing so, would she lose the one thing that had kept her going, the search for the truth? Was she already too far gone to escape? Charlie's heart pounded, her body frozen in place as the voices of the watchers swirled around her. The mansion loomed, an ever-present force, its cold walls closing in, echoing with the weight of centuries of pain and power. The air itself seemed thick with the pulse of the curse. "Choose now, keeper," the watchers whispered in unison. Their voices were like 1,000 moths fluttering in her ears, frantic and relentless. "Your past, your fears, they will consume you. Or you will consume them. The mansion demands its price." Charlie's breath quickened. She had no time. The test was not just of her strength, it was a test of her soul. The power within her surged again, sending a rush of heat through her veins. She could feel the curse, her curse writhing inside her, demanding release. For a moment, she could almost hear the faint whispers of those who had come before her, the other keepers who had faltered, their voices swallowed by the darkness of the mansion. Could they have overcome it, too? Or had they, like Lalaurie, been consumed by their own desires? "What do I want?" The question echoed in her mind, a terrifying reflection of her own inner turmoil. Did she want to break free of the mansion's hold? Or did she want to harness its power, bend it to her will and rule it, as Lalaurie had done? Charlie closed her eyes, focusing on the heat of the power surging through her. She could feel it, its raw, untamed energy, and she understood, for the first time, the terrible allure of it. But she had learned something in the weeks she'd spent here. The mansion did not give its power freely. It took something more than blood. It took something deeper. The void before her split open, and the cold light of the mansion's past filled the air. Charlie felt herself pulled forward, as if by some invisible force. She saw Madame Lalaurie once again, standing in the center of her grand, opulent home, surrounded by the broken souls of her victims. But this time, there was no darkness in Lalaurie's eyes. There was only desperation. "I thought I could control it," Lalaurie's voice echoed, soft but clear. "But the mansion, it's never about control. It consumes you, just like it consumed them." Lalaurie's eyes locked with Charlie's. For the first time, she saw something other than malice in her gaze, something almost human. "The mansion doesn't care about you," Lalaurie's voice whispered, fading into the wind. "It only cares about the power you're willing to sacrifice for it." Charlie's knees buckled, and she fell to the cold floor, clutching the journal to her chest. The weight of Lalaurie's words hit her like a tidal wave. Sacrifice. She had seen it in the other keepers, their willingness to give up their souls for the power. She had seen it in herself. Was that what she had been doing all along? Was that what she was still willing to do? Suddenly, the dark figures of the watchers loomed larger, surrounding her. Their faces were featureless, but their presence was suffocating. "What will you choose, Keeper?" they boomed in unison. "Will you give in to the mansion's hunger? Will you bend to its will, or will you break free?" Charlie lifted her head, trembling, but her resolve was clear. She knew the price of power now. She knew the darkness it would drag her into. But she also knew that she couldn't go back. There was no going back. She had already stepped into this cursed world, and there was only one way to truly end it, to face it, and to fight. She stood, her legs unsteady but determined. "I won't be your pawn," she said, her voice ringing out through the void. "I won't let the mansion consume me." For a moment, the watchers were silent. Then, one of them spoke, its voice carrying the weight of eternity. "You claim defiance, Keeper. But defiance is what has led so many before you to fail. You cannot escape the mansion's grasp. You are already bound." The ground beneath Charlie's feet began to tremble, cracks forming in the air as if reality itself was warping around her. She gripped the journal tighter, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It was more than a collection of pages now. It was a symbol of her choices. A reminder of the curse, the power, and the cost. Her mind flashed back to the moment she had first set foot in the mansion. She had been drawn to it, just like Lalaurie. She had been looking for something: truth, fame, answers, but now she realized the truth was darker than she ever could have imagined. She was more like Lalaurie than she cared to admit. They were both inextricably linked to the mansion's fate. But she didn't have to follow the same path. Charlie's voice rang out once more, trembling but strong. "I won't be you. I won't be a monster. I'll face the watchers. I'll break the curse or die trying." The watchers fell silent. Their glowing eyes dimmed, and the ground beneath Charlie's feet settled. The mansion's walls groaned, as if in response to her words. A deep, resonating hum filled the air. "Then you have made your choice," the watchers whispered. "The price of defiance is steep, Keeper. But the choice is yours to make." Suddenly, the void shattered, and Charlie was back in the mansion. The familiar creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. The smell of dust and decay in the air. But something had changed. The mansion seemed quieter. As though the weight of its history had been temporarily lifted. And then, someone stepped forward from the shadows. It was Finch. "I knew you would make this choice," he said, his voice low and knowing. "But now, Keeper, the real battle begins. The mansion will not let you go so easily." Charlie's stomach tightened. Finch's words held a warning. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Charlie's pulse raced as Finch's words echoed through the silence of the mansion. His face, shadowed and unreadable, loomed before her. He was a figure from her past, a ghost who had haunted her thoughts in the darkest moments. But now, he wasn't just a reminder of her choices, he was the harbinger of the struggle yet to come. The weight of the mansion's history was heavy in the air, and Charlie could feel its presence pressing down on her shoulders. Every creak of the old walls, every flicker of the dim candlelight, seemed to whisper that she had made a dangerous choice. One that would force her to confront the very heart of the curse that had gripped her for so long. "You don't understand," Charlie said, taking a step forward. "I don't want to be its keeper anymore. I want to free myself, free all of us." Finch shook his head, a sad smile crossing his lips. "You think you can just walk away from this, Charlie? You think you can break the mansion's chains with words alone? You are its keeper now, and the mansion owns you as much as you want to deny it. You'll have to fight for every inch of your soul." Charlie felt a chill creep up her spine. There was no denying the power that coursed through her now, the dark energy of the mansion pulsing beneath her skin. She could feel it, like a second heartbeat in her chest. It was tempting, so tempting to give in, to let it control her, to embrace the power it offered. But she fought it. She had to. "No," Charlie said, more firmly this time, "I won't be consumed by it. I won't let it define me." Finch took a step back, his expression unreadable. The shadows around him seemed to grow, darkening the room as if the very mansion itself were leaning in, listening. "You don't understand," Finch repeated, but this time, his voice seemed different, more urgent. "The mansion won't let you leave. Not unless you go through the ritual, the final trial. And even then, you might not survive. The Watchers won't allow it." Charlie's heart sank as his words hit her. She had been so certain of her resolve, so sure that her decision to defy the mansion would lead to freedom. But now, the reality of her situation was becoming clear. Escaping this place, breaking free of its grasp, would require more than willpower. It would require something far greater. "What ritual?" she asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Finch's gaze darkened. "The ritual to break the keeper's bond. It's the only way to truly escape the mansion's hold. But you must confront the Watchers, face the darkness they've become, and win their favor. You can't fight them physically, they're not of this world. But you'll have to defeat them within yourself. They feed on your deepest fears, your regrets." Charlie felt a chill wash over her. She could already hear the Watchers whispering in the corners of her mind, their voices like shards of glass scraping her thoughts. "And if I fail?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Finch's expression hardened. "Then you'll become like them. Trapped in the mansion forever. A part of its cursed history, unable to escape the cycle. Just like the others who have come before you." Charlie's blood ran cold. She had seen their faces, the lost souls trapped in the mansion, forever bound to its power. Would she join them? Would she be lost to the mansion, like Lalaurie and so many before her? No. She couldn't let that happen. Finch led her through the maze-like halls of the mansion, past the rooms she had once wandered aimlessly, searching for answers. Now, each step felt heavy with the weight of the curse. The walls seemed to close in, their whispers growing louder, more urgent. They reached the grand staircase, its dark wood worn by centuries of footsteps, and Charlie felt a sudden sense of dread. This was where it had all begun. This was where she had first felt the pull, the terrible attraction that had drawn her deeper into the mansion's dark heart. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice trembled. She wasn't sure what she was ready for, but she had to do this. There was no other choice. Finch's gaze softened, but his eyes still carried that same dark knowledge. "Are you? Because once you start the ritual, there's no turning back. You'll have to confront everything. The mansion doesn't let you go until it's taken what it wants." "I'm ready," she repeated, more forcefully this time. With a nod, Finch gestured toward the door at the end of the hallway. A cold wind blew from within, and Charlie felt her heart pound harder in her chest. She knew that behind that door lay the final test. The watchers, the darkness, her past, everything would come to a head in that room. Finch opened the door. Beyond it lay a vast, shadowed chamber, the floor covered in cracked tiles and dust. At the center of the room was an ancient altar, its surface carved with symbols she didn't recognize. The walls were adorned with strange runes, glowing faintly in the dim light. And there, standing before the altar, were the watchers. Their forms shifted in the shadows, tall and indistinct, but their eyes, those eyes were fixed on Charlie. "Welcome, Keeper," their voices boomed in unison. "You have come to face the price of your freedom. Are you prepared to pay it?" Charlie swallowed hard, her throat dry. The room felt like it was closing in around her. The watchers weren't just watching, they were waiting. Waiting to see if she was truly strong enough to face the ultimate test. "I'm ready," she said, her voice shaking but firm. The watcher's eyes flared with an eerie light. "Then step forward, Keeper. Prove that you have the strength to defeat us. Confront your deepest fears, and if you succeed, you will be free. Fail and you will become one of us." Charlie stepped forward, her feet heavy as if the very air was resisting her. The watcher's eyes followed her every movement, their silent gaze making the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The room seemed to shift, the walls bending and twisting as Charlie felt herself falling deeper into the mansion's power. Her surroundings dissolved, and in an instant, she was standing in a dark forest alone. The trees around her were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. A voice rang out in the distance, familiar, but distorted. It was her mother's voice. "Charlie, why did you leave us?" Charlie's heart stuttered. The guilt, the pain of losing her parents, flooded back, choking her. She saw her mother standing in the distance, her face pale, her eyes filled with sorrow. "No," Charlie whispered, stepping backward. "No, I didn't leave you." But her mother's voice continued, taunting her, accusing her. And then, from behind her, came another voice, the voice of the one she had truly feared. "You think you're different from me? You're just as broken, just as willing to sacrifice everything for power." It was Madame Lalaurie's voice. Charlie turned, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing before her, was Lalaurie herself, smiling wickedly, her eyes burning with a malevolent fire. Charlie's pulse quickened. Was this truly the battle she had to face? Her own deepest fears, the guilt, the desire for power? Was it all leading her to this moment, where she had to choose once and for all whether to embrace the darkness within or fight against it? Her hands trembled, but she refused to let them shake. She wasn't her mother. She wasn't Lalaurie. With a deep breath, Charlie took a step forward, facing Lalaurie and herself. The air around Charlie grew colder, thick with a suffocating tension. The forest around her began to twist, the trees bending in unnatural ways, their branches reaching out like fingers, clawing at the darkness. She stood there, trembling, but she forced herself to focus on the figure before her, the one she had feared for so long. Madame Delphine Lalaurie. Her once elegant figure was now a grotesque silhouette against the darkened trees, her eyes burning with a malicious fire. She was the embodiment of everything Charlie had learned about the mansion: the cruelty, the obsession with power, the endless suffering. "You think you're different." Lalaurie's voice was like a snake's hiss, her smile twisted and cruel. "You think you can escape the mansion's grip, just like that? You are mine now, just as I was once bound to this place. The mansion doesn't release its keepers. It devours them." Charlie took a deep breath, her fingers trembling but steadying as she gripped the journal in her hand. The very essence of her connection to the mansion hummed in the air around her, a raw, vibrating power she had never fully understood until now. "I'm not like you," Charlie said, her voice low but resolute. I won't let the mansion turn me into a monster. Lalaurie laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that sent chills down Charlie's spine. Not like me? You already are, child. You have the same hunger inside you. The same lust for power. I see it in your eyes. It's too late for you to turn back. Charlie shook her head, her chest tightening. Lalaurie's words pierced her, but she refused to believe them. She knew she wasn't lost yet. She still had a chance to break free, to fight the darkness. She had to believe that. I don't want to become you, Charlie whispered, the weight of her choice pressing down on her. I want to break the cycle. I want to set the souls free, including mine. Lalaurie's eyes narrowed. Foolish child. And then, the forest around them began to shift again. The trees bent back, revealing a vast, open space. The ground beneath Charlie's feet cracked, and the distant sound of chains dragging across stone echoed through the air. A deep, guttural voice filled the air, sending a cold rush through her veins. The Watchers are here. The final test has begun, Keeper. Charlie looked around frantically. The Watchers, she could hear their whispers, feel their presence, even though they weren't visible. The air itself seemed to shimmer with their power. Lalaurie turned slowly, her gaze cold and calculating. You want to break free? Then prove you can face what you fear most, what we all feared. Only then will you be worthy of your freedom. Charlie's breath caught in her throat. She knew what she had to do. She wasn't just facing Lalaurie's taunts or the Watcher's power. She had to face the darkness within herself, the part of her that had been seduced by the mansion's power, the part that had wanted to control it, to claim it as her own. Her hands clenched into fists, the power swirling within her, pulling at the edges of her mind. The mansion wanted to control her, to consume her. But Charlie wouldn't let it. She couldn't. Suddenly, the ground beneath Charlie's feet began to tremble, and the trees around her began to close in. The shadows twisted, turning into distorted shapes. Figures from her past appeared, her mother, her father, and even her younger self, standing in the distance, each one representing a piece of her deepest guilt and regret. Her mother's voice reached her first. Why did you leave us? The words were soft, mournful, but they hit Charlie like a hammer. Then came her father's voice, cold and accusing. You never cared. You always wanted more. You could never be satisfied, could you? Charlie's chest tightened. She could feel the anger, the shame, rising inside her. The mansion had found her weakness, her guilt, her constant need for validation, the fear that she would never be enough. But this wasn't her fault. She had done what she had to do. She had survived. No, she whispered, taking a step forward. I didn't leave you. I was trying to find the truth. I'm not the person you think I am. But the voices didn't stop. They continued to twist and distort, like a chorus of her own doubts, echoing in the distance. She could see Lalaurie in front of her, her wicked smile still lingering as the shadows around them grew darker. You're just like me, Lalaurie taunted. You'll never escape. You can't fight what's inside you. Charlie closed her eyes, forcing the voices out. She focused on the energy within her, the power the mansion had given her, the power she had almost let consume her. It was hers, not the mansion's. She would take control, not let it take control of her. With a shout, Charlie extended her arms, calling upon the mansion's power with all her might. The energy surged through her, a violent, intoxicating force, but she refused to let it consume her. She bent the power to her will, shaping it, channeling it. I won't be you. Charlie cried, pushing against the darkness with everything she had. I'm not a monster. I'm not the keeper of this place. I am me, and I will be free. The mansion seemed to groan in response to her declaration. The shadows writhed, the trees bending back, and the air was filled with a sudden, Piercing silence. The watchers were still there, watching, waiting. And then, a voice not Lalaurie's rang out from the darkness. The battle has only just begun, Keeper. You've broken the first part of the cycle, but the price is steep. You cannot escape the mansion so easily. Charlie spun, searching for the source of the voice, but all she could see was darkness. The Watcher's presence was stronger now, more tangible. They had seen her attempt to break free, and they were not done with her yet. You are still bound, the voice continued. The mansion's power has chosen you, and no matter how hard you fight, it will always call you back. Charlie's heart hammered in her chest. She was no longer sure where the battle ended and where her own darkness began. Could she ever truly escape? The air inside the chamber grew colder, the oppressive weight of the mansion bearing down on Charlie as she stood before the Watchers. Their eyes glowed like embers in the darkness, and their forms remained shrouded in an ever-shifting haze, neither human nor truly otherworldly. They were the mansion's enforcers, its oldest guardians, and they had watched countless souls falter in the exact spot where Charlie now stood. You think yourself strong, Keeper? Their voices reverberated in unison, like the grinding of stones. You have tasted the power, but power comes with a price. Are you ready to pay it? Charlie's throat tightened. The temptation was still there, a quiet voice whispering at the edges of her mind. If she surrendered to the mansion, she could wield its energy fully, bending the world to her will. She could escape her fears, rewrite her failures, erase her guilt. But she knew it wasn't that simple. I don't want your power, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. I want freedom, mine and everyone's. I won't be your keeper. The Watchers loomed closer, their shadows stretching toward her. Freedom, they echoed, their tone mocking. You still don't understand. The mansion is freedom. Its power can make you more than you've ever been. It can heal your wounds, mend your broken soul. Without it, you are nothing. Charlie clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. You're wrong. It's the mansion that's broken people, trapped them, turned them into prisoners. I won't be another one of its victims. The Watchers hissed, their forms swirling faster, agitated by her defiance. Then you will face the cost of your defiance. The Keeper's bond cannot simply be severed. It must be burned away. Do you have the strength to withstand the fire, Charlie Bennett? Or will you crumble, as all the others have? The chamber suddenly shifted. The ground beneath Charlie's feet became molten, glowing with a fierce, unnatural light. She stumbled, barely catching her balance as the floor seemed to liquefy and reform, dragging her deeper into the mansion's domain. A wall of fire erupted around her, licking at the edges of her consciousness. It wasn't just heat, this fire burned with memories, fears, and regrets. It showed her every moment she wished she could forget, the fights with her parents before their accident, the times she doubted herself, the loneliness that had driven her to take dangerous risks in search of meaning. The fire whispered to her. You carry so much guilt, Charlie. Let us take it from you. Let us make you whole. Charlie fell to her knees, her chest heaving. The memories threatened to drown her, to drag her under the weight of her own pain. But through the roar of the flames, another voice emerged, a voice that was calm and resolute. You are more than your guilt, it said. Charlie blinked, looking around, but there was no one there. The voice came from within her, a part of her she'd almost forgotten, the part that still believed in herself, despite everything. Fight it, she whispered to herself, her voice shaking. You're stronger than this. She forced herself to stand, her legs trembling beneath her. The fire surged higher, the memories growing sharper, more painful, but Charlie refused to let them consume her. She reached deep inside, finding the thread of light buried beneath the darkness. And then she pushed. The fire faltered, the heat receding as Charlie's defiance grew stronger. The watchers howled in fury, their forms flickering like dying flames. "This isn't possible," they hissed. "No keeper has ever defied the fire." Charlie took a step forward, her gaze steady. "Maybe that's because they didn't know they could. But I do. And I'm done letting you control me." The flames around her began to die, replaced by a cold, eerie silence. The chamber trembled, cracks spreading across the walls and floor. Charlie could feel the mansion's grip loosening, its power wavering as she broke through its defenses. The watchers were no longer imposing figures. Their forms flickered and shrank, their voices losing their edge. "You cannot break the bond entirely. You will always carry a part of the mansion within you." "Maybe," Charlie said, her voice firm. "But it doesn't control me anymore." With one final surge of willpower, she reached out, pulling the remaining threads of the mansion's power away from her soul. The bond shattered with a deafening crack, and the room was flooded with light. The watchers screamed, their forms dissolving into shadows that slithered away into the cracks of the chamber. The ground beneath Charlie's feet solidified, and the oppressive weight lifted from her chest. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she could breathe. Charlie emerged from the chamber into the dimly lit hallway of the Lalaurie mansion. The air was still, the oppressive energy gone. She could feel the absence of the mansion's power, a void where its presence had once been. But there was something else, too. A faint hum beneath her skin, a lingering trace of the energy she had wielded. The mansion's power wasn't gone entirely, it was now a part of her. As she stepped outside into the night, the cool air hit her face, and she looked up at the gas lamps glowing softly along Royal Street. She was free, but she wasn't the same. The mansion's curse had been broken, but its legacy wasn't over. Charlie had inherited its secrets, its knowledge, and its responsibility. And as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was watching her, waiting to see what she would do with the power it had left behind. The weight of freedom felt heavier than Charlie had imagined. She stood outside the Lalaurie mansion, its dark silhouette framed by the pale glow of moonlight. The oppressive energy that had once radiated from the building was gone, but its presence lingered, etched into the air like an unspoken warning. As she took a step away from the wrought iron gate, the street seemed quieter than before. The gas lamps flickered faintly, and a soft breeze carried the scent of wet stone and jasmine. But something was different, Charlie could feel it. Her skin prickled with a strange energy, and the world around her seemed sharper, more vivid. The mansion's power hadn't entirely left her. It pulsed faintly beneath her skin, like an ember waiting to reignite. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. Charlie had been lying low in a small inn on the outskirts of New Orleans, trying to make sense of everything she had endured. Her dreams were vivid, filled with fragments of the mansion, twisting hallways, shadowed figures, and whispers that grew louder each night. But it wasn't until the fourth night that the dreams became something more. She awoke with a start, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was dark, but she wasn't alone. A figure stood at the edge of her bed, its outline blurred and shifting. "You think it's over," the figure whispered, its voice a low growl that sent shivers down her spine. Charlie scrambled backward, her heart pounding. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The figure stepped closer, and for a brief moment, its face came into focus. It was one of the watchers, its eyes burning with a familiar, otherworldly glow. "You broke the bond, but you didn't destroy it," the watcher hissed. "The mansion's power still flows through you. And where there is power, there will always be those who seek it." Charlie's stomach sank. "What do you mean?" The watcher's form flickered, its edges unraveling like smoke. "The mansion wasn't the only source of darkness in this world, Keeper. You've drawn attention. They're coming for you." Before she could ask more, the figure vanished, leaving behind only a faint, acrid scent and the echo of its warning. By morning, Charlie knew she couldn't stay in the inn. Whoever or whatever was coming for her wouldn't stop until they found her. She packed quickly, grabbing the journal, her recording equipment, and a small pouch of protective charms she had purchased from a local voodoo practitioner. She didn't know if they would work, but she wasn't taking any chances. As she walked down the cobblestone streets, the weight of the mansion's power seemed to press heavier against her chest. She could feel it now, like a living thing, whispering at the edges of her mind. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. "You're not safe. Meet me at the St. Louis Cemetery, midnight. Don't trust anyone." Charlie's hands tightened around the phone. Whoever this was, they knew about her, and they were watching. The cemetery was eerily quiet, its ancient tombs casting long shadows under the pale moonlight. Charlie kept her footsteps light as she navigated the narrow paths, her heart racing with every sound. At the far end of the cemetery, a figure stood waiting. They were cloaked, their face obscured by the shadows of their hood. "You came," the figure said, their voice calm but urgent. "Who are you?" Charlie demanded, keeping her distance. The figure lowered their hood, revealing a man in his early 40s with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. "My name is Elias. I've been tracking the mansion's influence for years. You're the first keeper to break free, but that's only the beginning." Charlie frowned. "What do you mean? What's coming?" Elias stepped closer, his expression grim. The mansion wasn't just a place of horror, it was a nexus. A gateway to something much darker. By severing your bond, you've disrupted the balance. The Watchers aren't the only ones angry about that. There are others, groups, individuals, even forces you can't imagine who want what you have. What I have? Charlie's voice wavered. "I don't want any of this." Elias shook his head. "That doesn't matter. The power inside you is a beacon now. If you want to survive, you'll need to learn how to use it." Charlie stared at Elias, her mind spinning. She had fought so hard to free herself from the mansion's grip, and now she was being told that her fight was far from over. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. "You don't have to," Elias said simply. "But if you don't, you won't last long. They're already closing in." Charlie looked around, the shadows in the cemetery suddenly seeming deeper, more alive. She could feel eyes on her, the weight of unseen forces pressing down on her chest. She took a deep breath, the mansion's power humming faintly beneath her skin. It wasn't just a curse, it was a weapon. And if she was going to survive, she would need to learn how to wield it. "Fine," she said finally. "But if you're lying to me, I'll make sure you regret it." Elias smiled faintly. "Fair enough. Let's get to work." As they left the cemetery, the night seemed to grow darker, the air heavy with the promise of what was to come. Charlie's journey wasn't over, it was only just beginning.